Dan, maybe you do the welcome and the intros then. Okay, we are recording.
Recording has begun. All right, and it's 5 o'clock. I'm gonna let people in. We're up to 8. We're up to 9. There we go.
Yay.
Okay, just waiting for a few people. I see they're connecting still, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. We hope this opportunity helps to answer some questions, give some perspective on transportation as a whole, and maybe give a chance at the end to ask some questions that haven't been asked to this point. My name is Dan Schloeffel, Interim Superintendent, Snoqualmie Valley School District. I had an opportunity to meet with a few of you last week regarding this particular issue. We have Connor Laffey here, our Chief Communication Officer, to help facilitate tonight. Ryan Stokes, Assistant Superintendent, and Belle Tromp, Director of Transportation. A little bit about the format tonight. It will be a webinar format. There'll be a report to start to give some overview of transportation. The second half, the team will use to answer the questions that were shared with us in the last several days. At the end of that, there may be time to ask questions via the chat that Connor will help us moderate and make sure we can get those answered. If we don't know the answer, we'll let you know that and we'll get back to you. If we do, we'll answer it tonight. We do have an hour. I want to thank the team. When I asked them to put this together on pretty short notice, and their different schedules. So we do have an hour of schedule tonight. So we're going ahead and get started so we can get through all the information and give you a chance to ask questions via the chat at the end of our presentation. So again, thank you for being here tonight, and hopefully you find this helpful.
Thanks, Dan. I'll kick us off. So we'd like to just share a bit of information. Hopefully this will, as we share this information, answer some questions that we've heard and try to answer, give you some context on where we're at and how we got here and where we're going, and kind of let you know what our current status is, and hopefully that'll help answer some questions. I know our board president was also hoping to join, and so she may be able to join soon and listen in, and so she was interested in hearing this meeting as well. And we're recording it, so if folks we're unable to attend but want to review this later, we can make that available as well. So I'm going to start by sharing these slides and make sure that it's sharing. Connor, is that sharing the right one?
Yep, you're good to go.
So we first wanted to, let me get to where I'm advancing correctly. What we wanted to just go through, this is going to be very similar to the presentation that we will present to the board on October 13th. And we wanted to speak again tonight, maybe as it specifically pertains to the Heights, but also wanted to give you additional information and a preview of what we'll be sharing with the board. So some of the things that we've heard and that we think would be helpful tonight is we'd like to just talk a little bit about what it takes to transport students in the district, and Belle's here to help us answer some of those questions. What happened at the start of school? What changed over the summer that made us have to quickly adjust and make some of these changes that we wished we didn't have to do? And then also just talk about the impacts district-wide to the driver shortage, and give you, I think what you're most interested in is an update on our personnel and when we might be able to reinstate the Heights stop in their normal location. So if we first just high level district wide, we are one of the largest districts geographically in the state. It's interesting to note that over 700,000 miles are driven by our buses, and we typically transport over 6,000 students a day. So that's a lot of things going on and a lot of distance covered. Bill, do you want to, this slide's really talking about, as the transportation team works on routing each year, what are the factors that go into that? Bill, you want to take that?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So there's a lot of stuff that comes to the table when we're considering routing and how we put it together. First and foremost is our specialized transportation. Our students with IEPs and 504s, McKinney-Vento, all those are legally required that we supply transportation to our impacted families. So those would come first and foremost when we're considering routing plans and putting it all together. Safety is obviously the top priority in meeting those needs and making sure that how we transport kids, we do so safely. So when we're setting up routes, we don't want to do left-hand turns across busy or high-speed roads, 50 mile an hour or such. We don't want to pick up or cross students. We primarily want to pick them up door side. So how do we route in that realm? And then efficiency, we're governed by the WACs and RCWs to route efficiently, which means that that's why you see our larger buses out there picking up to 84 elementary and 57 middle school, high schoolers, so we can be as efficient as possible. And that's how we're funded. The bell times of schools and how we anchor, and having a centralized high school is another one of those challenges that we have to overcome as far as getting our outer regions, as Ryan spoke, the mileage that we cover, getting them into the centralized high school as well. General education, we're not required to transport, but obviously it's a preferred service that we provide with a 1 mile walk zone. Typically around the school is the mandate for not transporting within. And then outside of that, we can set our bus stops. And then we also have to meet stream, which is another program that we have in general ed. And then efficiency, that's how we're funded. That's how we drive our ridership and fund our route efficiently. So if we have one driver, CDL driver, we want to make sure that we're servicing 3 levels of school, secondary, both levels, middle school, high school, and elementary, because that's going to be the most efficient instead of having just one driver service like one school in particular. And all those factors come into the routes. Ryan, do you want to, is this one?
So in a typical morning, we just wanted for a general ed route. These are the parameters that Belle and her team have to work through in order to make all this work. So we start on the outer edges of the district because we have to work our way towards the center where the high school is. And so for a secondary pickup, we typically start as far out as it goes and work our way towards it. This is really a scenario that is specific to Chief Canham and Twin Falls. And we'll talk about SMS just after this. But for Chief Canham and Twin Falls families, the secondary pickup then proceeds to the middle school, except for the folks on the ridge, because we aren't able to get them to the middle school and then back to the high school. So our Fall City and North Bend residents, they get picked up, they get dropped off at the middle school. And we'll talk a little bit about that. They get dropped off before the bell time because we have to get the buses from the middle schools up to the high school in time for the high school bell time. So that takes us about 90 minutes from start to finish. And then those buses have to go back out to the outer reaches of the district and do the same thing for elementary. So that's our turnaround time for each level is about 90 minutes. We've had some questions on scheduling and can we change the schedule? We had a schedule committee who looked at this, later start times to help with sleep for secondary students. Do we do like a 3-tiered approach where we do middle, high school, and elementary? And some of the outcomes of that were a bit challenging because of that 90-minute turnaround time. If we went to a 3-tier model where we maybe started high school and then middle school and elementary, you'd have a 90-minute break in between them. So that would mean you could start someone at 7:30, someone at 9, and someone at 10:30. And so that puts a pretty late dismissal time on whichever end that is. So the committee worked through that a couple of years ago, and we weren't able to make really significant changes from that perspective. And it's mainly because of the limitations we have on transportation. And then I forgot to update these, but we wanted to just also show you kind of those times in order to I think our first bell, remind me, I got that info today. Our first secondary pickup is at 6.
I think it's 6:25. Let me just pull that back up. Sorry.
So our first secondary student that gets picked up is somewhere before 6:30. And if they're a high school student, then they aren't getting dropped off at the high school until 7:35 is our target. So this really just tries to help you see, we're collecting students there in the morning. In order to get to the high school on time, we have to get our middle schoolers dropped off. And our target for most buses is about 7:17, so that those middle school buses can then continue up to the high school and get there by 7:35 or 7:40. Most of our high school buses, we try to have there by 7:40 or just thereafter, so that there's 7 or 8 minutes for them to get to their class. And that's a challenge. We've had some lateness in those arrival times, and something that we're continuing to look at on changes we can make.
So case in point, the one that we were talking about, our earliest pickup 6:23 drops off at 7:35.
And then for SMS students, it's a little bit different. SMS does have a different start time from our other middle schools. It's a little bit earlier. We have currently 4 buses that service Ridge students that go to SMS or the high school, and we have them do a double run. So they collect as many middle schoolers as they can and drop them off at the middle school in the morning. They're dropping them off as early as 7:05, and then they go back up onto the Ridge to collect high school students and get them back by 7:43. In the afternoon, then we reverse that. Obviously, we go start at the center of the district and work our way to the edges. So high school dismisses, if we're talking Chief Canham and Twin Falls, high school dismisses at the same time as Chief Canham and Twin Falls. The high school buses have to get loaded and get out to those buildings. The kids have to be supervised at the middle schools until then. SMS high school is a little bit different. The SMS, because of their earlier start time, they dismiss earlier. And so with the SMS kids go home first, and then we have students at the high school waiting for those buses to come back. After they're done with all the middle school and secondary delivery of students, we have to then get back to the respective elementary schools. For the most part, that's pretty easy because, a Fall City bus is out there and just has to get back to Fall City Elementary. But we have to have some buses come all the way back to SES to pick up our STREAM students, which is the gifted program that's a magnet school at SES. We have to get those kids back to the elementary school in order to deliver them to their homes. And so that is also creating some delays as far as these longer routes that we're experiencing with our secondary students, is also creating delays for buses to get to the elementary school on time. Another couple of challenges as we think through this, and we've heard from a number of you on questions of this, why don't we change this or that? So under our current scenario, we have middle school students being supervised 30 minutes before the bell and 30 minutes after the bell in the afternoon. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge to supervise students before the school day. Some questions might be, well, why don't we just, since they're there, why don't we lengthen the middle school day? So our teacher work day is 7.5 hours. And if you're ever picking up a student after school, you notice the teachers are basically walking out with the students, and that's because that's the end of their contracted day. So the middle school teachers already have the most student contact time because of that schedule, where we're getting students starting and ending a little bit after what the high school might. Another option would be, okay, let's solve this by shortening the high school schedule so that we can get those buses down to the middle schools in time for that dismissal. Well, the state has some minimum student contact times and instructional minutes that we have to meet, and we're right at that minimum for the high school, and so we aren't able to shorten the high school day anymore. In previous years, we had slightly different bell times, and that is something that we might continue to relook at. We might, let's say, start the middle schools earlier, and that would maybe eliminate the morning supervision, but the challenge then is it lengthens the afternoon supervision because our high school schedule can't get shortened. And so there's some challenges when we talk with our secondary staff and administration. Trying to supervise students longer than 30 minutes is even more challenging because, as you know, they're pretty active, and that gets to be problematic the longer that time is. In previous years, we did have a larger number of middle school only routes because that does decrease how many students are needing to be dropped off early or picked up late. Last year we had 7 routes, was it, Belle?
For last year,
Yeah.
the middle school only routes.
Yeah, I think it was 7 routes. And so we eliminated 6 of those this year because of the driver shortage and trying to not cancel service for anyone.
We had a total of 8 actually, so we canceled 7 or combined.
So that was one of the trade-offs last year when we canceled service for 4 areas. It allowed us to keep some middle school only routes. And when we decided this year that last year we had hoped to only have that cancellation be temporary, and it ended up not being. And so those families didn't have transportation for the whole year. And our priority this year was to try to not have any service cancellations above and beyond what we had already done, and to try to reinstate some of those that didn't have it last year. The other thing just in general that we have to consider, again, as we think about all these changes and tweaks, is that travel time between the buildings. And again, the turnaround time of getting students home and then getting back to the school. So this may look simple, but it's actually extremely complex. We're scheduling to the minute. We might be able to make some changes and then realize that there's no way the bus could get there on time. And so that kind of drives some of our routing as well. So what happened at the start of school? Let me just kind of give you a little bit of a history. So in 21-22 last year, as most of you know, we had canceled 4 areas for the whole year. That was for secondary students. We were able to serve the elementary portion, but we canceled Snoqualmie Pass. We canceled the western area around Twin Falls Middle School, downtown Snoqualmie, and then downtown, I say plus Fall City. It's more of an extended downtown in Fall City. And when we have this shortage, secondary is our biggest bottleneck because there are no great walk zones in secondary. And so where elementaries, you have a large portion of students that are within the walk zone, we don't have that in any of our secondary schools. And so that's why you see the cancellations had to be focused on the secondary, because that's where our largest driver demand is. Last year, we had tried to focus those cancellations on the areas closest to the building. As we looked this year and wanted to reinstate those, cancellations farther away from the building, as you can hopefully appreciate, are much more challenging. It's much harder to get people to coordinate rides and get their kids to school. And so we're really trying to not have to do that. We had also last year continued some changes that were made when we came out of COVID, and that was making Cascade View a walk-only school. And so there were no more bus service for Cascade View students. And then David Powell Road used to have a small bus that went down it. It's the road along Snoqualmie River down in Fall City, on the south side of the river. And we used to only be able to serve it with a small bus because there's nowhere to turn a large bus around down that road. And when we experienced that driver shortage, we had to move that stop to Preston Fall City Road. So students who live on that road, which is about 2 or 3 miles long, have to get themselves into essentially downtown Fall City to pick up a bus. So that was kind of where we ended last year. Over the summer, we wanted to take a new look, right? We had come out of COVID and weren't sure when we came out of COVID about what ridership might look like. We had the changes with the physical distancing and windows having to be down. So we just weren't sure. We had asked parents to help us by transporting students. We anticipated more people riding this fall. And so this summer we brought in our software company Versatrans. We brought in a technician for over a week to help our team relook at all routes and try to make sure we could we change some things and get as efficient as possible and try to meet our needs with our limited number of drivers. And then so once they kind of help us with that, our transportation team with their knowledge of the nuances of the area also then help us kind of tell us what the software is telling us might work that really wouldn't work. And as I mentioned earlier, our goal was really to reinstate those canceled areas and avoid additional service cancellations. And that included reevaluating Cascade View and David Powell Road. We were feeling fairly confident that we would be able to meet that goal. And then a few days before the final week of school, we had 3 driver resignations. And that really kind of threw us for a loop. And let me just show you kind of what that looked like. So when we came out of the summer, we had 37 drivers that we were expecting to come back, but we had 39 routes that were needed to be covered. So before we lost the drivers, we were looking at having 2 routes not covered and trying to figure out what our plans were. And that doesn't count our out of district routes. We also have to transport students that qualify for specialized services out of district. So we may have a student who qualifies for deaf and hard of hearing school in Everett, and we have to transport them. For a number of years, we used to transport them with bus drivers, but for a number of years, but because of our shortage, we have to hire essentially car services to transport those students. So going into our bid day, which is a contractual day with our union, as far as when they come back from their summer break, they get a day to review the routes, and then the next day they bid on them. So we had thought we would have 37 drivers bidding on routes to cover 39 routes. So we knew there'd be 2 short. And then the Thursday before that bid day, we lost the 3 drivers. And so our 37 went to 34, and we had to get creative. And we definitely knew we couldn't leave 5 uncovered routes. And so that's where the Heights stop got moved. You know, our Snoqualmie Pass route that's typically done by a 4-wheel drive bus. We decided we would service that with a motor pool vehicle. We have an expedition for that. And our team had to go back and look at further combinations of routes and stops in order to make that work. So when we went to bid day, we had 34 drivers with 37 routes. And so we weren't sure how we would get those covered. So this is the week before school. I know that there's been a lot of frustration about our timing of the communication, and we wanted to give you some context as to the rationale on that. So Monday is the week before school. The Monday is the bid preview. So our drivers get to come and review the routes that will be available for them to bid on. Tuesday is our bid day, and we were pleasantly surprised. We had 2 substitute drivers who also came in and decided to bid for a route. That gave us 36 total drivers to cover 37 routes. So we still had 1 route uncovered in that case. Wednesday, we go to driver in service, which is an all-day training. And so our team is kind of unavailable to do some of the final preparations. And in this case, the final preparation was what we did on Thursday. As the drivers test drive those routes, we want to make sure that the time it takes to go through those routes is what we think it's going to be. We also had to confirm that we would have a trainee who is available to drive the expedition to basically serve as our uncovered route. And so that was important to know, because if we didn't have that coverage, we had some more decisions to make. We also had some special ed and kindergarten registrations still coming in to the transportation team. They usually need 3 or 4 days to get those students routed. And so they were trying to turn that around in a 12-hour period. Again, because we were so close to the edge of having even worse outcomes, we were trying to make sure that we were pretty sure that we could deliver what we were going to communicate. And so that's really the reason for the Friday communication. Was it wasn't really until Friday that we felt like we were done having to make changes with the routes moving here.
And just so I can jump in there, Ryan, on the bid day, I mean, we didn't know it was going to come down to the bottom line, because we actually expected there might have been some drivers who were coming who had not resigned yet to bid day that actually would not end up taking routes. So we couldn't commit those routes until we actually had bid day and had those drivers in hand. We still had to turn around. It usually takes us about 3 days to route. And we had to turn around and try to absorb 5 to 7 special services routes and get them all routed in 24-hour periods. So that's where we came with our final outlook on Friday.
So the impacts of all of this, we wanted to give everyone a view of kind of the impacts that we're dealing with. We obviously are aware of the Heights impacts. That's why we're here tonight. The Snoqualmie Pass is an impact as far as a different vehicle and limited, a much smaller capacity. Cascade View is a walk-only zone. We talked a little bit about Stream and that impact to our elementary arrival times. Ames Lake, we've had to change as well. We used to drive further along into Ames Lake. We're now doing a drop-off and having them walk farther home. The double runs between middle school and high school at SMS are later than typical. We're seeing delays everywhere because we had to combine a bunch of routes. Ride times for many people are longer than they used to be. Eagle Lake, which is past the golf course on the ridge, their secondary route, they have to get to Fairway to get on the bus. So they have a pretty long walk area as well. We mentioned the middle school only routes, again, 7 or 8, and then we canceled all but 1 this year. So we lost 7 routes there, meaning more kids came to the middle school before and had to wait longer after. And we've talked about David Powell Road. So hopefully you've got that. Extracurricular, we don't have any drivers for any of our extracurricular needs. So we're doing that with charter buses at quite an expense. And so anyway, we just wanted to give everyone kind of a view of what we're seeing district-wide, the frustration that we're hearing from numerous folks, and the frustration that we're feeling as far as not being able to provide the service to the level that we'd like. We're almost done. Sorry, this is we want to make sure we have time for your questions. This is then our personnel. So where are we? Where have we come from? So this is really just to give you an example of the number of contracted drivers we had pre-COVID, as many as 50. And then coming out of COVID, it was as few as 37. And that included having our substitutes be full-time subs to try to get them benefits sooner and help cover absences. And that was in an attempt to try to attract and retain more drivers. And then at the start of this year, as we mentioned, we only had 36 on board. Since then, we've hired 3 more, and so that's brought our current to 39. Recruitment efforts to try to improve this. We had hiring incentives for new drivers. We increased for credentialed drivers, and that we're seeing some good outcomes there. We've hired 1 credentialed driver and have 2 to 3 that are going through the application process and should be onboarding them soon. We've significantly increased driver wages over the last 6 to 8 years, nearly 10% per year, as far as an average increase in wages. Bell's initiated a Drive the Bus campaign to have people come and get on a bus and not be as scared to drive it. And then we've tried to increase both the paid training and additional work opportunities for our trainees while they're going through training. Bell, do you want to talk about kind of obstacles as far as attracting new drivers?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So when we go to a schedule, one of the big questions we ask in the interview, what interests you the most, what interests you the least? And a lot of it is both the schedule. Some have liked the schedule, some don't. It's challenging to get drivers who want to be available that early and then have a split midday where they're off for 4 hours and then come back in for the afternoon. A lot of people are looking for full time, and in school bus schedule, unless you're up on the schedule, you're going to be running about 5 to 6 hours a day and not 8. So sometimes that's a distractor, but getting them to fit into that schedule. Student management is another barrier, obstacle we try to overcome. We train them, give them all the tools. It's just some of the drivers with the student management and having to deal with the kids and some of the parents' behavior can be a challenge. And I've had people quit just from their ride-alongs early into their program. It's not for everyone, it's for the right one. But the requirements are probably the biggest. Driving record, you have to have a clean driving record. You cannot have 3 or more speeding tickets or moving violations within a 5-year period, or that's an automatic disqualification. Although your CDL may only be disqualified for a short period, your school bus authorization from OSPI will be invalid or not authorized for another 5 years on top of that. That also includes drug testing. We do pre-employment, randoms, reasonable suspicion, and post-accident testing. At any time, our drivers are expected to be tested, and they need to be drug-free. And although it's legal in Washington State, marijuana and products are not legal for federal guidelines, which we're bound by. And that includes CBD. You know, we do have a senior crew that drive as their retirement program or their plans, their second job. And so maybe there's aches and joints. And so CBD oil that's over the counter will actually disqualify them for 5 years. So that is another barrier. And then training. It takes 8 to 10 weeks minimum to get drivers trained. And I have a lot of people, you know, that are surprised when they get into the program, not knowing what's all involved. And I have a visual for that. The book, CDL book, to train to be a CDL driver, which means tractor trailer in Washington State, is maybe less than ½ an inch thick. This is the book that is required to drive a school bus in Washington State. As you can see, it's quite a bit thicker, a lot heavier, more intense training to make sure that our drivers are ready for being the safe, efficient drivers that they need to be for our students. And so that's another barrier. And there's no guarantee that there's going to be a route when they get done with the training. Maybe they have to be a sub. So maybe they have to accumulate hours, 640 hours to qualify for benefits. Or if they get a route that has to be a minimum of 17.5 hours a week to qualify for benefits.
So we're trying our best to overcome those, but I think that's just, those are a lot. We may interview 10 people, and when we go through some of those questions, we lose half of them before they even get into the program. So we wanted to give you a trainee new hire, because I think that's one of the questions that we're anxious to let people know. Last year, we hired 10 drivers, which is about 25% of our workforce. We were very happy with that. We thought that was going to make progress. Unfortunately, we lost as many drivers, if not a little bit more. This summer, we had 4 trainees. We have 2 that have received their CDL and currently are full-time subs. We have 2 ready to test, but one of them is out until November. And so we have 1 close to being ready to test and another that won't be testing until November. We also started a new class of trainees right after school started. We started with 7 candidates. They are now down to 4. So for various reasons, they drop out. And that's just to give you an idea of kind of the attrition as you go through that process. I mentioned earlier that we've hired 1 credentialed driver. We have 2 to 3 applicants that we have are in the process of hiring. So that's good news. If you look at kind of the second through the 4th line, we basically have the potential to hire 12 drivers in this first few months of the year, which is as much as we had last year. So we're actually feeling pretty good about how many we're getting into the system, and some of those things that we've changed. We think that we're seeing some good results from that. And we're currently, we never stop interviewing candidates. So we currently are interviewing candidates for another training session to begin late October. So the question is, when can we increase service? And that is a challenge for us to answer. And I know that that's very frustrating for everybody. We've communicated that we need 5 full-time substitutes to cover those absences. That's about 12% of our staff. And Bell, for time, I was going to have Bell kind of jump in, but I'll just paraphrase for Bell. We typically have 5 to 8 absences very frequently. I'd say in the last 3 weeks, most of our days are at least five absences. And we have continually changing demands. As Bell mentioned earlier, we have to provide transportation to our special education or folks who qualify. And as we look at route times and ridership, we're constantly making changes. And then driver availability. We do have a different population, and they are close to retirement age, and so they may relocate or be on some sort of leave or retirement, and that happens throughout the year. This is really a challenge for us. The other thing is when we increase service, the other things that we're monitoring is, can we limit the morning of cancellations for driver absence? This is twofold. One, if we're doing a morning of cancellation, it's impactful to the folks who are getting that last minute notice. It also means that most of our office staff are out driving, which is challenging because it means that we aren't supporting them. We may not be dispatching, and we may not be able to respond to an emergency. We just had one on Friday where there was a medical emergency on the bus, and Belle was able to go and respond and help support the student and the driver and the students. If she was out driving a bus because we were trying to limit cancellations, we would not have been able to respond. We've also had a number of parents reach out to us about current late arrivals and student loads. And so those are 2 other issues that we're continuing to monitor. We're hopeful that with the I-90 traffic done, this last week has looked a lot better. There are still a few routes that arrived late, but it doesn't look like it's a repeat every day. And so we're hopeful that those arrival times are improving. So we wanted to give you a status, and this really, we were hopeful that today was going to be an opportunity for us to give you good news, because if you look at the top part of this, we had 3 full-time subs that are currently in the pool. We have a driver who's ready to test and should be testing later this week. And then we have the 2 credentialed additional drivers that are ready to be hired and should be with us in the next few days. So that would have given us 6 potential subs. The challenges last Thursday and Friday, we learned that we were losing another driver who was moving out of the area. And we had an additional 2 to 3 students who had been identified as needing specialized transportation in areas that we don't currently have transportation. And so that's going to pull a driver to that need. We also have another driver who is potentially leaving. And so that keeps us farther away from the 5. We were hopeful that we'd be able to share tonight that we were at the 5, and we were going to have a date here in the next week or 2 where we'd be able to reinstate. But because of those recent developments, we're unfortunately able to do that at the time. Looking forward though, we do, as I mentioned, have another trainee ready to test in November when they're back. We do think that we'll continue to attract some potential credentialed drivers, and so we're hopeful we can get a few more hired. And we have 4 current trainees that started in September. They're at the start of school, and 2 of them we think will be ready to test by mid-November. So we're still hopeful that is assuming that we don't lose more drivers, that we should be hopefully able to get to that 5 driver here in the next month or 2. But I would preface that the surprises that we had last week tend to happen sometimes. That's most of our presentation. Again, we wanted to recognize that everyone is in on this. We've had a lot of work on our transportation department trying to make this puzzle work. We appreciate our school staff who have had to adjust and supervise students outside of the day a lot more frequently and for longer periods of time. Our bus drivers definitely have borne a lot of this frustration. They want to be, they are very passionate about the work, and they don't like being late. They don't like when people are unhappy. And so we really appreciate them sticking with us and working through that. And we appreciate you as parents and your students for having good attitudes, being understanding. We know that you have borne a lot of the brunt as well. And we're trying to minimize that wherever we can, but we appreciate the contribution of everyone. So that's kind of the slides we wanted to go through. And then Connor, did you want to go through the questions that were submitted?
Yeah, why don't you go through the questions that were submitted, and then we'll allow everybody in attendance to ask their questions in the chat, and then I'm keeping track of those as they come in.
All right, so we've collected the questions that were submitted, and then Belle and I will probably just take turns here addressing some of these. So the first question is, why can't the kids be dropped off in the afternoon the first time they drive by the access road? This will shave almost 15 minutes of afternoon ride time for Heights students. Belle, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so we did look into this because we heard this concern from the beginning, and we wanted to see, and again, always stay open to options and look into what we could do. So we went out there, including with the OSPI Regional Transportation Coordinator and some of the parents that are here today. And it was by kind of a consensus that we determined it wasn't safe to do so. There's no place for the students to step off the bus. It is a limited visibility from behind the bus approaching when they're trying to cross the road. I went out with one of my mechanics and actually had him do a student stop, and I got off the bus to cross the road to see how it would look and take present. And just on cue, as I'm crossing the road, there's a car bypassing our red stop paddle lights and everything, just about to hit me if I didn't stop him. So that would be a safety concern for our kiddos. And so that's why we didn't go ahead and say, hey, let's drop on the way up, because we're open to solutions. We're trying to explore everything we can and provide what we can when we can.
Thanks, Belle. The next question was, we said that we want 5 subs. We already have 2 and 2 part-time. Are we willing to compromise for 3 subs and 2 part-time subs so that our route can be reinstated sooner? Before dark mornings and icy access road conditions become an issue for 55 students. So I think hopefully we tried to give you some examples in the presentation as to why that's important for us. We want to, when we do reinstate, not have to yank things around. And again, the 5 subs are, if we don't get to that point, we've got challenges district-wide that we're not sure that we can address. And so that's really been why we've put in that mark. I know that was folks were wanting to know what it would take to get there. And so that's where we felt like we needed to get to before we increase service. Next question is, what is the district's expected date for reinstatement of the Heights bus stop? And at what time would the district commit to going back to the drawing board if additional delays continue related to driver shortage to equitably distribute this burden across the district instead of the Heights? So again, I think hopefully from what we just shared recently, that while it's not happening as fast as we had hoped a few days ago, we're still hopeful that we're going to get this done here in the near future in the next 6 to 8 weeks. That being said, things continue to change. And so that is barring any additional drivers leaving or additional specialized student needs that have to come up and take that. As far as going back to the drawing board, that's a challenging one to answer, because we feel like we've pulled all the strings and all the levers that we can to make it work. So barring canceling someone's service outright, we're not sure that there is a ton of options, but our transportation team definitely is continually monitoring and trying to find those options. It was harder this year because with the I-90 closure, we didn't really get a good picture of where normal operations would land until this last week. And so as we continue to look through those, if we find some efficiencies that would help us get there faster, we would definitely institute those. Next question is, knowing that one of the biggest frustrations for parents has been a lack of transparency and communication throughout this, what are the district's plans going forward to more effectively inform parents of changes and respond to concerns? Belle?
Do you mind if I speak to this? Because this was something that I've spoken with several of the parents, and I held my hand up to, as far as, yes, we had some last minute things that came to fruition that we didn't get to communicate adequately enough. And we want to make sure that we continue to communicate with you as we go through. And we met with some of the parents out at the stop. We touched base. I was speaking with one parent last night as well. I want to keep that open communication, and moving forward as things develop, we will be reaching out on a regular basis to answer those questions and to make sure that we are making sure that we keep you in the loop and transparent. And I'll be honest with you, this is not where we thought we were going to be even a week ago.
Belle, also the next question, can you explain why canceling the Heights bus stop was fair in regards to the rest of the Ridge?
So as we mentioned in the presentation, we talked about how it's kind of spread around the whole district. We didn't go into total details, but we across the district, not only in Snoqualmie, but in North Bend and Falls City, we combined routes across the board. Eagle Lake's affected, Heights is affected. And quite honestly, if there was anywhere that I could take or stop and move it to another route and be able to fit those students on there and get them to school in lieu of canceling, that was the one thing we tried not to do, is cancel anyone's service. I get that they're not ideal, and that's not what our goal is to keep the stop at all, to reassure you for the Heights family. But we had to find what we could do to get service and not cancel. And we spread that across the board. And there's different families affected everywhere that are walking further than they used to. There are buses that are more full than they have been with less drivers. And so that we just tried to spread it completely across the district from one extreme to the other.
Thanks, Belle. I'm going to have you answer this one too. It's a similar question to the one I tried to respond to earlier. And so I'll give you a chance to respond to this and maybe add anything that I may not have covered. Why do we need so many substitutes? In the real world, there are not 5 people to cover positions. The safety of the children should be the main concern. The stop is getting dark, foggy, and unsafe. The bus stop should be reinstated with the next available driver.
I completely understand the urgency of wanting to get this done, as I've talked with the families. This last week, as we've shown, we've been down with so many absences. 10 to 12% is not unheard of having absences daily from our force. And we were down to, when we went out to meet the neighborhood, I was one driver calling out from not even being able to make that meeting because I would have to be driving. Last week, we had our office staff driving and trying to keep management in place, which is me in the morning and my transportation manager in the afternoon, to respond to emergencies. And had I been driving as well, as extreme as our absences were last week even, I wouldn't have been able to respond to that medical emergency on that bus.
I think another great example was, last week we got some emails about high school buses arriving late, and the transportation team wasn't aware of that because they were out driving. Typically drivers would say, hey, let the principal know that we're going to be 10 minutes late or something. And because we had people driving the whole time, there was no communication of that. And so that was a bit of a surprise to the transportation team because the office staff wasn't aware of the late arrivals.
And Ryan, that's a good example of one of that we're constantly assessing and where we can fix. And we were able to work with those 2 routes that were pretty late to the high school, making sure that we adjusted that route and get all the families notified so that we could get them to school in time to make their classes.
And then Belle, is there a solution coming soon so that my son doesn't have a 2-hour daily commute?
So I was looking at the routes and trying to assess this, and case in point for our Route 30 stop that goes from Chief Canham to the walking path. I did a couple studies of where it is and how it's transporting, including not only our telemetrics, but with our driver. And on September 7th, for example, I just pulled a random sample, and it was 28 minutes from leaving Chief Canham, the students clocking in, to when they clocked off the bus at the walking path. And then I did a snippet today. It was 27 minutes from when they clocked in at Chief Canham to when they clocked off at the walking path. So we are trying to keep the rides as limited as possible. But there are families around everywhere that are, including the whole ridge. We have 4 double run buses that go to different neighborhoods that are students are waiting at the schools and getting home, not at their ideal times.
Thanks, Bill. We also then have, why are 55 Heights kids driving around for 45 minutes to drop off 10 kids? For what is a point-to-point drive of 7 minutes Chief Canham to the Heights access road?
So when we relocated the stop for this neighborhood, and again, temporary stop, I want to reassure everyone, this was not our permanent solution. This is not our plan for a permanent solution. This was added on to an already existing route. And when I talked about how we plan our routes, when we go out to the furthest and pick up on the way in, barring any other safety concerns like turning left on 50-mile-an-hour roads or high-speed roads, even 45 would be too high to turn left. It takes a bus about 15 seconds to make a left-hand turn from the time that the front of that 40-foot vehicle starts till the back end is clear of the traffic. So we just added it onto the stop. As we talked about, we looked into possibly changing when the students at the walking path were dropped off to cross, but we've determined that was not safe. So that is only why it's set up the way it is. Preston Falls City Road, the kids that get dropped off there, we would have to, if we turned around and did the walking path first, we'd be making left-hand turns against that road, limited visibility, higher speed. It's just not safe.
Thanks, Bill. The next question I think is similar. It's and maybe if I don't know who answered or asked it, but if we didn't, I think we've answered it. But if we didn't, maybe put it in the chat. Why do we have 55 kids from the Heights canceled route ride around for 40 minutes to accommodate 10 kids? It doesn't make much sense. I would like to know why this decision is a logical one. So I think you addressed that, Bill. Whoever submitted that, if you don't feel like that was answered, please resubmit in the chat. And then our last pre-submitted question. Bell, could you say you could have selected any other of the district's many routes to combine? Why was the Heights chosen?
So I think we addressed that in the presentation, and I may have addressed it in my comment before. We combined at least 7 to 8 routes. It was not just the Heights neighborhood. And as I've spoken to many of the families here, and you've been really great and given me some grace on the communication. I understand that, and I've tried to be open. I have no idea of the history, and that did not play into our decision. It was more of a logistical one, how we could take one driver that was servicing one school and now service 3 different schools with it over here by just moving the stop until we could get our trainees on board and trained and in place.
So those were all the questions that were submitted prior to the meeting. Connor, you've been monitoring the chat. Do you have other questions that we could address?
Yeah, we've gotten a few that have come in. The first one was, and we just talked about, is can we address why our route was specifically chosen to be canceled? And so we'll remove that one. But the next one, and this one was for you, Ryan. How specifically did the I-90 closure impact our specific bus routes? We heard this numerous times, but not how.
I think the biggest impact was the arrival times. We had a lot of delays because of that. The Parkway was pretty loaded. All of 202 was pretty loaded, and so our arrival times to middle schools and high schools were significantly delayed, and so that made it challenging to be able to evaluate whether that was because the routes needed to be adjusted or because of traffic. And so when we were trying to get answers to folks, it was hard to know. You know, we wanted to see what it looked like without those. Bill, I don't know if you have other, you were out there and hearing what the drivers were seeing. Anything else?
All our routes that were coming from Fall City down the Parkway, even in town, were impacted by the closure of the lanes on 90 and Highway 2 due to the smoke. All traffic was diverting in both directions because, you know, I-90 was the only way to get over west with Highway 2 closed, and there was a slide up, I think, on Highway 20. So they were coming down through I-90 and coming down the Parkway to get back over to Monroe, and vice versa to get back east. So for that first couple of weeks, while that closure was going on and the fires were going on, that impacted all our routes and timing.
All right, so moving on. Now this question came in, and I think in the middle of a question you're answering. So we'll see if we can answer it here. Why can't those 10 kids walk to our stop? And I believe this was in reference to our question 8 that you had discussed earlier.
So the already existing route actually has 118 students assigned to it.
Okay. Now this one question we did kind of ask or answer, but they were asking for the possibly earliest date, but we'll ask it anyway. If driver staff trainings do not change from what they are today, what is the earliest date our route can be restored?
Yeah, I think we tried to show that in the slides. Assuming we don't lose anybody else or have to divert drivers to special ed routes, you know, we're thinking mid to end of November would be when we'd be able to get to that five substitute threshold. That, you think that's fair, Belle?
Well, and again, I'll just have to reiterate, you know, a week ago, we were hoping to come here and go, hey, here's your date, and it's earlier than you expected. And then all these anomalies happened, and I'm pulling my hair out. I would say that that's probably the reasonable timeline now, given everything that's just occurred this last week.
Okay, next question. So this individual heard us talk about safety as a priority several times in this presentation. We've already had one student trip and fall on the access road, and it's not even wet or icy yet. If we're looking at November, December, seems like safety is not being prioritized over the inconvenience of possibly daily call outs. So I guess it's the question is, if we're not going to be able to reinstate until November, December, possibly, are we prioritizing that over possible daily call outs? That makes sense.
So I'll take this and start with Ryan, and you can wrap it up. So when we have call outs, we don't just say, oh, here's a call out, and we just cancel that route. We actually look at it logistically. What can we do? How can we solve it without canceling service? So we may move pieces around. Okay, so we're going to take this half of the route for that was not showing up, and we're going to move it over here to this route. And hey, driver, you over here and doing this route. Can you move over here to this one and help cover this half or this third or this quarter? And so that's our initial thing. And we don't want to reinstate your route and then say, well, due to cancellations, we're moving your stop back here and to the access path, because then you'll take this and we can go cover these other routes. I want to give you something that you have and that all our families have that they can depend on, because consistency matters, safety matters to our kids. And I don't even have consistency now to cover the combined routes that I have. We're scrambling and offices driving.
All right, next question. Did we consider making consolidated stops in all areas to reduce the length of routes and possibly allow for more routes?
And we have. That's how we even got to where we are now, that we can cover the routes we are. We do have kids, and I get weekly, if not daily, complaints of how far students are riding or how long students are riding. And we have stretched it probably as far as we can stretch it at this point.
And one of the factors on that is we consolidate, we move stops, you know, Ames Lake, Eagle Lake, Heights, a couple of other areas. And part of the challenge of that from a routing perspective is you still have to have the time to get to all those stops. And so you can only really consolidate stops where there is some population to be able to condense, and you still have to go and do the onesies, twosies that are far outreaches or rural areas. And so that time is a challenge. So it buys some time where we can do it, and we've had to do that. And then there are others where it's pretty hard to get that pulled off.
And our special needs route that we're required by law to provide, I have a preschooler who's riding for over an hour on a bus because that's the best option we have. And that's not ideal for a preschooler.
Okay, Bell gave 2 examples of bus arrival times to the stop. What is the average time so far for the year? No one lives by the bus stop, and why don't you include walk times? Some have a 15-minute walk after a 45-minute wait after school.
I think that'll probably be one we'll need to have some time to look at what average times are. So we will take that and maybe add that to our FAQ online once we have that info.
Yep.
Okay. So the number of questions. Oh, here's one. Sorry. Apologize if I missed one. Feel free to keep sending them to me. There's been a lot of different questions and chats and comments, and so try to keep track of the best I can. So if I've missed yours, please continue to send it in, and I'll make sure I get to it before we're done here. Where is our inclement weather route? Is the city or ROA planning to de-ice the road?
So Bell, I think what I've heard from you and your team is that we haven't looked at snow routes yet, but we acknowledge that for the Heights stop, the snow route for that route doesn't really work. And so we will have to figure out what to do in the event of a snow route to accommodate the Heights students.
Yep. And that may be the case that we're running all the office staff to accommodate a snow route that is safe to get that neighborhood on those rare occasions that we're rolling in those kind of conditions. But I won't know that until the end of this month when we had a chance to go through them.
And so far, that's all the comment or questions we've received. And again, if I've missed one, feel free to go ahead and send it to me as soon as you can. We'll try to get that before we get out of here before 6.
And again, if you have questions, we do have a few more minutes. Please put them in the chat and we'll get to those.
All right, we just got one more that ran in here. Okay, equity is a large concern. We're bearing the brunt of the busing hardship. Our ride times are much longer. Meanwhile, we have a more ethnically diverse neighborhood. What is the bus tag data to show? Where is the bus tag data to show our ride times compared to other neighborhoods? Why should we commute for 2 hours when there's other neighborhoods on the bus for 40 minutes?
I don't know how you, Ryan, you want us to put that in a spreadsheet to put on the FAQ. I've pulled up Route 30's details. We can go to any date. I just don't have it compiled in a spreadsheet right now, but from September 1st to October 3rd, I have in front of me that we can view if you want.
Yeah, maybe we add that to the FAQ as well, once we can get a chance to look at the data and answer that question.
Another question that has come in is, what is going to happen when the soccer kids and cross-country kids are on the bus in the afternoon?
I think that kind of goes along with some of the challenges where we've been we usually give ourselves a few weeks to see what normal times are. Once sports start, we tend to have decent ridership numbers Monday through Thursday, and then Friday, when there isn't any middle school sports, the buses get massively overcrowded, and we don't know, until we see those Fridays, we don't know what that means. And that's again another example of, if we're having to leave kids at the school and come back and get them after the route is done, That's another of the factors that we look at when we're trying to balance all of the demands of the transportation system. So far, I think we've been able to make the Fridays work. I haven't heard of a lot of kids getting having to wait at the school for us to go get a bus load dropped off and come back and get them. Belle, you'd probably have more firsthand experience if that's happening than I do.
Well, we have our activities running to bring the kids home, but as far as, and I've run into this with a lot of parents, is I don't have any guarantees of when a bus comes in the afternoon, the anomalies that would prevent it from traveling. I'm sorry, Ryan, could you repeat the question too? I had
What happens when soccer and cross country start riding the buses?
So the main thing that I tell the families, other than the activity buses for the after school activities, if there's something outside, I generally recommend that parents look to self-transport, only because I can't guarantee what's going to happen with the bus. Case in point, we had buses running down to Chief Canum. They were on I-90 and didn't even get to make their Chief Canum runs because they were stuck from an accident. There's just too many things that we can't go around in a bus. So I can't answer that.
Okay, next question. Your presentation showed 10 to 15 minutes of wait time from delivery to bell time for elementary and high school. Why are middle schoolers waiting more than 30 minutes in the morning?
Ryan, do you want to speak to that again? Because you covered it in the slide.
Let's pull up the slide just a sec. Hold on. Sorry, just a second. Where'd it go? Hold on.
While we're waiting, we do see the hands up. If putting a question in the chat is not meeting your needs, we may have a few minutes at the end to take a few of those live questions. Those questions need to be civil, and they need to be questions that haven't been asked already. So if the chat is not meeting that need, once the chat questions are answered, we'll take a few minutes for others.
So is everyone seeing the slide okay? The target. So the challenge is we got to drop kids off at the middle school and get those middle school, the buses then continue on with high school students up to the high school. And so in order to get those buses to the high school, some are getting there at like 7:43 is when they're supposed to be getting there, which only allows 7 minutes to get to their classes, which is a challenge because the campus is large. So really that's what's driving the wait at the middle schools, is we have to get kids dropped off at the middle schools and move on to the high school in order to get them there on time.
And as we address, it's not just our secondaries that are waiting or have commutes, because we've had to consolidate across the district. We even have, as I mentioned, preschoolers that are riding longer than they are, ideally supposed to be riding. We're trying to meet all the needs and not cancel any service to anyone. I can't tell you how big a struggle it is and how much we put our heart and minds and what creative ideas we can come up with just to get our kids to school. That's our goal, is to get them here.
And I guess let me reiterate too, like we were crushed last week. I mean, when we got 3 credentialed drivers to apply, I mean, we were so excited because we were like, that was at our 5 target. And so kind of the changes last week have just been really deflating because we really wanted to have better news for you all. We know it's been frustrating. We've missed the mark on communicating with you, and we're trying to improve on that. But that was just, we were really looking very hopefully last week that we were there, and now we're not again. And so that just is, that is a roller coaster that we've been riding the last couple of years, and it's not where we want to be, obviously.
All right, next question. Who is liable for injuries on the emergency access road?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't believe that districts have liability for how students get to the school, to the bus stop. But I have not looked into that. We would have to get some answers from legal counsel on that.
Why is the neighborhood at the back of the ridge bused past all the neighborhoods that are closer to the Parkway and Chief Canaan and Snoqualmie Middle? It'd be more efficient to bus some of those neighborhoods to Chief Canaan and bus us to Snoqualmie Middle.
When we brought back the Snoqualmie Middle School and we're bringing on Timber Ridge, that boundary process happened at that time as far as what options worked best. I don't recall exactly all the reasons of why and why not. I know that one of the things that we felt was helpful was having a feeder pattern. And so having elementaries proceed on to a middle school so that student relationships were remained intact. I think that's one of the reasons why we didn't change the elementary boundaries with the middle schools, because we felt like that was a definite positive to have students kind of know where they were going. The elementary boundary is a totally challenging one. Cascade View has been full for a while, and I know we looked at different parts of where to go. K North went to Cascade View, and when we looked at whether or not we could accommodate the heights at Cascade View, there was too many students to bring all of them into Cascade View, and so we weren't able to kind of make that balance. And so that was one of the reasons why the heights had too many students, so we couldn't bring them by themselves to Cascade View. That's my recollection. Again, it's been a while since I have looked at all that info, so I'm speaking off the top of my head on that.
We're down to 2 questions, and then I just messaged Brady to let him know that we will unmute him in just a minute. He's had his hand up for a very long time, so thanks for bearing with us there, Brady. For the special needs transportation, those drivers don't need a CDL if they aren't driving a bus. So those drivers could take a route and others drive them. Is that correct?
Could you repeat the first part of that, please, Connor?
Yes. For the special needs transportation, those drivers don't need a CDL if they aren't driving a school bus. So could those drivers take a route and others drive the students that are required through an IEP?
And that's a great question. It's just the fact that the buses are packed. And so by law, if we're transporting a certain number of students, including the driver, to and from school, that has to be in a school bus, which requires a CDL. And so even we have one CDL driver that's driving a van, but it is packed with 8 students in the seat. We're just, all our routes are packed because we're short on drivers. And we're not servicing our out of districts.
We've definitely been more aggressive on that this year as far as having our trainees drive a motor pool vehicle when we have onesie twosies. The challenge is that we're running out of trainees who are available to make that drive. And so where we can, we would definitely look at that. But at this point, our resources are limited to be able to do that.
And we are using all our motor pool vehicles to meet all the onesie twosies that we can to help enable the CDL drivers to be with those MAX students.
All right, last question, and then Brady's up, I promise. Knowing that things may continue to change, at what point will the district pursue different options than just staffing? And then for examples, we're outsourcing district-wide rerouting examination, etc.
I can speak to a couple of those. We looked coming out of COVID when we had our first massive shortage, we looked at outsourcing some of those. And we talked with, I think it's First Student and what's the other one, Bell? Durham. They didn't have drivers to do it, and they were unwilling to do, we were looking for, hey, can we contract with 5 to 10 drivers? Their answer was basically, we would want to take over all operations. Oh, and by the way, we don't have any drivers available. So we tried that a couple of years ago and didn't have great answers on that. What was the second option there? Oh, rerouting everything, which is what we did this summer when we brought Versatrans in. We asked them to help us look at everything carte blanche, here's all the transportation that we needed. Here's how many drivers we think we're going to have. What are our options to make this work? Can we figure out a way that doesn't completely cancel service for more people this year?
And we also need to add to that, we partner with Snoqualmie Valley Transit to help some of our TLC students get to where they need to, or to and from, so that we don't have to provide a route.
We had also looked at Snoqualmie Valley Transit for gen ed service last year. They have some limitations from their funding perspective. They can't drop off at a school. It impacts their funding, and they're unable to do a fixed schedule or time. So if someone else signs up for the travel, they would also bring those. And so we weren't seeing that as an option to help increase basically our driver capacity.
All right, Brady, you're up.
Yeah, sorry, it's Dan. Brady's my son, so.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry, Dan. My
It's okay,
apologies.
it's all good. I appreciate the time that you guys have taken here. I would just say that I think this is a little bit of a missed opportunity. Many of us were really expecting you guys to come to us with a plan and come to us with solutions rather than just we're short drivers. That's always the answer that we seem to get from you guys on everything. I think a lot of us were anticipating that this was going to be more of a problem-solving session than the 40-minute history lesson that this slideshow went down. And I think there needs to be some other solutions worked on by your staff here in the next week or so to come, because 6 to 8 weeks is not acceptable for many of the parents on this call. November, December is not going to be a viable solution when we're in the middle of winter, and you've already got kids that have hurt themselves already down that trail. 8 more weeks is only going to make the matter worse. So my question, I guess, is what is your plan? And Ryan, I know you said you talked to Durham 3 or 4 years ago. Well, why aren't we working with other contractors? You've got car services that you say you take some kids to. Why don't we supplement routes with fewer pickups with car services or shuttles or something else? We've just paid all of our tax dollars to these levies that the district keeps asking for. We are in a master plan community. I understand those stops that are farther out in the woods of Fall City and North Bend. We're in the middle of Snoqualmie Ridge. We should have direct service. So what solutions are you guys working on other than we're short drivers?
Well, I will also tell you with the onesie twosies, everything that we can onesie twosie with car services, we have, including our motor pool. All those other routes are packed with kids coming in that won't fit in the onesies twosies. But we're having trouble with our onesies twosies even meeting that need, because not only are we short drivers nationwide, there's driver shortages, including the car services, and we're getting cancellations of those services daily. And I will tell you, this is not, we had expected to come to you today with a plan. We were excited, and then we had the resignation and the special needs come up, and it just gutted us. We were all excited to come together, and we're like, hey, we're going to give them this, we're going to give them the state, we've got it in place, and then it all kind of went sideways.
Well, I like I said, I think, and I'll defer here to Katrina because I'm sure she has a good question, but I think you guys need to get creative, because just we're short drivers is not going to cut it with the families in this neighborhood. We've been impacted by poor decisions by this district for far too long. And I'll defer to Katrina.
I know that we'll take Katrina's question. I know that Mr. Stokes has to get to the city of North Bend for another meeting, but we'll take Katrina's question.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of, I guess, more voice sentiment. I genuinely believe that you guys are working very hard on this driver shortage. I know that, and talking with you, Belle, I believe that you're working very hard. My concern, and I think a lot of parents share this concern, is that this last week is probably an example of what we will expect to come going forward too. So that's our biggest concern, is that we, the hope was to have a plan in place by today, and then something else changed. So my worry is that that's just going to continue to be a pattern. And so at that point, staffing is not a solution for this. If this continues to be kind of this cascading effect, or this continuation of kind of the same, we think we've got it and then someone else leaves. And it seems like that's kind of been an ongoing theme, which, is outside of your control. So I'm hopeful, just a request that we can try to explore other options than just that, because our concern is that that'll just continue to be an ongoing issue in the future, and then we will be in the same situation in December, having the same conversation.
Thanks for that, Katrina. What I can add to this conversation is we're bringing this up with consortium districts, so districts that surround us. What are you doing? Are there any creative solutions that you have in place or you've thought of that we haven't? So outside of what I can share is outside of our own conversations and continually asking the staff to revisit, relook at what's the possible. We're looking outside to other districts if they're having any success or if they have any ideas that we have not considered at this point, even to the point of asking around routing, around other opportunities to get kids to and from. So I appreciate that question. In the end, we do need bodies to transport. And right now those are drivers, but if there are those different solutions that we haven't considered, we're continuing to ask those and reaching out to other districts that may have ideas that we haven't thought of. So I hope this was helpful. It sounds like it was for some of you, and others we may have missed the mark a little bit. We apologize for that. The FAQ will still be available if new questions come up. I know that Mr. Stokes and Bell have to get to another meeting. Dag, I see your hand up. I'm willing to stay here and answer one or two more before we have to get to our next meetings. But Ryan and Bell, want to thank you for your time tonight, and Connor for helping us facilitate that chat.
Thanks, Dan. And I want to echo my wife's statements. We really do feel like, especially, you've heard me say it multiple times, I feel like since you've come into your role here, there's been a significant difference. So that's very much appreciated. One of the things that I put in the chat to, I think it was Connor, right, that was running that, is can we capture the questions that were submitted, previous to the town hall meeting and also in the chat? Because I noticed I can only see mine. I think it would be great because, as you heard in the meeting we had last week with Melissa and Ryan, it's all about transparency. So if we can have like a document, like, okay, here are the questions that were, brought up, in the last town hall, here's where we are now. I think that's going to go a long way, just so we can kind of see it in front of us. So if that's something that would be possible, just something that captures all the questions that people submitted, all the questions that were in the chat, here's where we're at, I think that would really, really go a long way.
Connor, just checking in with you.
Yeah, I did copy the entire chat. And I do believe there's a couple of ways for us to extract the chat from Zoom, and then the 10 questions that were submitted via the Google form, we already have it. So happy to post those along with the answers, so you have that as well. And I'll probably do it when we update the FAQ webpage that we have for the transportation, and I'll have an entire section dedicated to the town hall. First 10 questions that were submitted via the Google form, and then the questions that were submitted via the chat.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep.
And the last thing I'd like to address is the purpose of the presentation was much of that presentation was an attempt to answer some of those questions that we've seen in the FAQ or that come across through an email or whatnot. So I apologize if that may have missed the mark a little bit, but that presentation was an attempt to get at a lot of those questions that have either been asked previously or we need to add some more definition to. So that was the reason for that presentation. Okay, again, we thank everyone for taking the time tonight and being willing to spend it with us, and hopefully we did answer a few of those. Obviously, more questions will come. We can commit that we aren't just sitting here and not trying to look at things and looking at them differently and looking for the art of the possible. We are reaching out to others and seeing what creative solutions they have or they might be able to add to our thinking. And we do recognize this has been a challenge, and we'll continue to work to hopefully remedy it soon. Thanks again, and we hope to talk to you all soon.